A simple act of kindness sets off a global movement. As Barron Trump's world changes, a mysterious woman and an unsettling truth unravel the lives of those involved. The still question remains. The early morning sun hung low, casting long shadows over Fifth Avenue. Barron Trump, barely 18, walked briskly toward the corner of 57th Street, his head down and his hoodie pulled low over his face. The cold breeze cut through the city, but he barely seemed to notice, his mind occupied by something far away. Few people recognized him, even fewer acknowledged him. In a city full of noise and chaos, he was just another face in the crowd. Then, something unexpected happened. At the corner, a frail, elderly woman struggled to cross the street. Her steps were shaky, her cane tapping the ground with slow, deliberate movements. The hustle of the morning crowd ignored her, walking past with their eyes glued to their phones. But Barron, as though sensing the need, glanced up at the right moment. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. He didn't make a show of it. No fanfare, no cameras, just a quiet, determined movement. His large hand gently reached for hers, steadying her as she took another step. They moved together, his arm supporting her with the care and thoughtfulness of someone much older. He helped her to the other side of the street, his face unreadable, his eyes focused only on her well-being. The elderly woman smiled up at him, a look of recognition flickering in her eyes, though Barron didn't meet her gaze for long. She thanked him softly, but there was something in the way she looked at him, a kind of silent understanding that didn't sit right. It was too personal, something familiar, almost intimate, as if she knew him far better than any stranger should. Barron's posture shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible change, before he nodded and turned, disappearing back into the crowd. None of this would have mattered, not really, if it wasn't for the hidden camera. A few hours later, the footage was everywhere. At first, it seemed like just another random moment captured by someone's phone. An act of kindness, a rare glimpse into a world where people still cared for each other. But as the video circulated, something shifted. The narrative was no longer about Barron's quiet act of compassion. It was about the subtle interaction between him and the elderly woman. The internet buzzed with theories. Was this a political move? A calculated PR stunt? Or, as some began to suggest, was there something more to the story? People couldn't stop talking about the woman's eyes, her brief, almost knowing smile, her tight grip on his hand. Was there history there, or was it just an illusion? The questions mounted, but the answers never came. The final shocker came when Barron's personal social media account, long a quiet, untouched corner of the web, suddenly lit up with a cryptic message. "This is only the beginning." The world paused. What did it mean? Was this some kind of warning, a promise? Everyone scrambled to decode the message, but the more they stared at those 5 words, the more the questions grew. What was Barron trying to say? Was there a larger plan unfolding? And if so, who was the mysterious woman who had sparked it all? The cryptic message from Barron's social media account hung in the air, lingering like a question no one could answer. This is only the beginning. Within hours, the internet was ablaze, speculating about the meaning behind those 5 words. At first, it seemed like an overblown reaction to a simple act of kindness, just a momentary spark that caught fire. But as the world watched, something strange began to unfold. People from all corners of the globe took Barron's quiet gesture to heart. Inspired by his unassuming act, they started performing their own random acts of kindness. A woman helped a neighbor carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. A man anonymously paid for the lunch of a stranger sitting alone at a cafe. In cities, towns, and villages everywhere, kindness rippled out like a pebble dropped into a still pond. Soon, the hashtag #BarronEffect began trending worldwide. It was innocent at first, just a surge of people sharing their stories, using the hashtag to showcase their own good deeds. But as more stories emerged, a pattern began to emerge that couldn't be ignored. There were reports of promotions at work, unexpected job offers, and people experiencing remarkable, even miraculous recoveries from illnesses. One woman claimed her husband, who had been battling cancer for years, woke up the morning after she performed an act of kindness, feeling completely healed. Doctors were baffled. There were others, people who'd been unemployed for months or even years, suddenly landing dream jobs. A struggling artist found their first major gallery exhibit, their work sold out before the doors even opened. The coincidences piled up. Was it the power of positivity, or was something more at play? Some experts and skeptics began to question the origins of the movement. Was this just a chain of feel-good moments, or was it something deeper? Barron's quiet action seemed to be creating a cosmic shift. Was it his upbringing, his years under the intense public scrutiny of the Trump family, that had shaped him into this unexpected symbol of kindness? Or was it something else entirely? And what about the woman in the video who seemed to share such an intimate, knowing moment with him? Was her connection to Barron more than a simple encounter? The more people dug into Barron's past, the stranger it all became. What they uncovered was even more puzzling. The elderly woman who had disappeared from the public eye the moment Barron helped her across the street was soon identified. She wasn't just any old woman. She was Evelyn McConnell, a former political insider with ties to some of the most powerful figures in Washington. McConnell had been quietly involved in high-level political circles for decades, but had mysteriously vanished from the spotlight years ago. Her sudden appearance and her interaction with Barron raised more questions than answers. Was she in hiding? What had brought her back? And more importantly, what did Barron's involvement with her mean? As more and more people began replicating Barron's act of kindness, the results became more unpredictable. Some people felt an overwhelming sense of peace and fulfillment. Others experienced a strange kind of anxiety, like they were part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just about helping others anymore. It was as if the kindness itself was creating a force, a movement that no one fully understood. But not everyone was enamored with the Tom Barron effect. A shadowy group, one that seemed to operate from the edges of society, began to show interest in Barron's actions. Their attention wasn't the kind that praised his efforts. Instead, it was colder, more calculating. Reports surfaced of mysterious figures attempting to gain access to Barron's social media accounts, subtly infiltrating the growing movement. Were they trying to control it, or were they merely observing? By the time Barron posted his next message, "This is bigger than you think," the world was left reeling. What had started as a small, selfless act of kindness had now evolved into something far more complex, and perhaps even dangerous. The ripple effect had begun. But now it was clear. There were forces in motion that none of them fully understood. The world might never be the same again. The wave of kindness sweeping the globe continued to grow, each new story carrying the Barron effect farther, deeper into the hearts and minds of millions. But with every act of good, a darker undertone began to reveal itself. Barron's involvement in the movement was no longer as simple as it had once seemed. His role was morphing into something larger, something more complicated, and as the world cheered him on, Barron began to feel the weight of it all. It started with the letters. At first they were harmless, almost cryptic in their tone. Simple handwritten notes that appeared without warning. The first one came 2 weeks after the viral video of Barron helping Evelyn McConnell. The message was short, yet chilling. "Be careful, you don't know who you're dealing with." Barron shrugged it off at first. But as the days passed, the letters became more frequent, more ominous. They seemed to follow him everywhere. "You are being watched. This kindness is dangerous. You're a pawn in something bigger. Barron tried to ignore them, but the anxiety was building, creeping into his mind like a storm on the horizon. He had no idea what these warnings meant, but it was clear someone was trying to communicate something important, and they were willing to go to great lengths to do so. The most unsettling part was the feeling of being constantly observed. It wasn't just the letters. Every time he left his house, he could sense eyes on him, the feeling that someone, somewhere, was always watching. And then the phone calls began. Unknown numbers. A voice on the other end, distorted, garbled. "You don't know what you've started, Barron," one said. Another time the message was more direct. "The woman you helped is more dangerous than you think. She's not who she says she is." Barron's family noticed too. His father, Donald Trump, was growing increasingly concerned about the political implications of Barron's newfound popularity. What had begun as a harmless moment of kindness had turned into a global movement, one that was attracting both praise and suspicion in equal measure. Trump's advisors began to make quiet inquiries, worried about the unintended consequences. The last thing the family needed was a sudden rise in Barron's public profile, especially with the world watching every move. Barron had become a symbol, but also a potential threat. The headlines, the rumors, they were becoming impossible to ignore. But as Barron's life continued to spiral into uncertainty, his family's concerns took on a deeper edge. The sudden surge of interest in Barron's actions had brought the spotlight not only to him, but to the shadowy past of his family. Reports began to surface, deep dives into his family's connections to powerful, secretive organizations that had always thrived in the dark corners of global politics. People speculated that Barron's kindness wasn't just an accident. Was it possible that he had been unknowingly swept into something far darker, something his family had been entangled in for years? Or, worse yet, was he being used as part of a larger, hidden agenda? The questions snowballed. It was no longer just a matter of kindness. It was becoming clear that Barron might have stumbled upon a conspiracy much bigger than he could comprehend. And then, the warning came. It was late at night when Barron received the message, the one that shook him to his core. The text, sent from a private, encrypted number, read, "You don't know who you're helping." The weight of the words hit him like a freight train, and Barron felt his heart race. He knew who had sent it, or at least who it was from. The sender was a name he had only ever heard in passing. Veronica Hayes. She had been one of the few who had come into Barron's life years ago. Someone close to him in his childhood, a family friend of sorts, but one he hadn't spoken to in years. What was she trying to say? How did she know about the mysterious group? And why now? He stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keys, torn between the overwhelming need for answers and the paralyzing fear of what those answers might reveal. As he tried to process what he had just learned, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. An unfamiliar number. A deep, gravelly voice filled the line. "You don't understand, Barron. You've become part of something that's been in motion for years. You're not just helping anyone. You're helping her." The voice paused, and Barron could feel the weight of the words. "You're helping Evelyn McConnell." Barron froze. The name hit him like a cold wave. Evelyn McConnell. The woman he'd helped across the street. The woman who had sparked this global phenomenon. But who was she really? What had she done? And why did it seem that everyone around him was so afraid of her? Barron felt a sudden suffocating sense of dread. Was he in over his head? The world had been watching as he helped an elderly woman, and now it seemed as though that moment was a gateway, a doorway to something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. There were forces at play, dark forces, and Barron didn't know who he could trust anymore. His family. They were too caught up in the fallout. The advisors. They were more concerned with damage control than with the truth. And Veronica Hayes. Could she be trusted? Or was she just another player in a game he didn't understand? The tension was thick, like a storm that was waiting to break, and Barron was standing right in the center of it all, unsure of how to move forward, or if he could escape the storm before it consumed him entirely. As the Barron effect spread, the world became divided. What began as an innocent act of kindness had transformed into a global movement, capturing the attention of governments, businesses, and even criminal organizations. On the surface, it seemed like a simple wave of goodwill, people performing random acts of kindness, believing that small gestures could change the world. But as the movement's influence grew, so did the shadows lurking beneath it. Barron was caught in the center of it all. His name was now synonymous with the movement, and everywhere he went, people looked at him with a mix of reverence and fear. Soon, the most powerful people in the world started to take notice. Influential figures began reaching out to him, pulling him into high-stakes meetings, each more intense than the last. They offered advice, encouragement, and, in many cases, subtle pressure. Barron felt it in their words, their gaze. They wanted him to take control of the movement. They wanted him to steer it in a particular direction, one that would give them leverage, power, and influence over the course of history. The choice seemed clear. Take charge, guide the world toward peace, and remain a symbol of hope. But as Barron spent more time in these meetings, he began to feel trapped. The kindness movement, which he had once viewed as a beacon of light, was becoming something else, something darker, more calculated. Behind every smile, every handshake, he saw the underlying desire for control. He felt it in the pressure from the politicians, the businessmen, and the covert groups who all wanted to use his influence for their own gain. One evening, during a private meeting in an undisclosed location, Barron was approached by someone who seemed to know him, someone from his past. The figure, cloaked in shadows, revealed a surprising piece of information. The kindness movement had never been about bringing people together. It was always about control. And Barron, whether he realized it or not, had unwittingly become a pawn in a much larger game. This figure, someone Barron had known in his childhood, spoke with a cold, venomous tone. They hinted at a deep-seated vendetta against the Trump family, claiming that the movement was a scheme created by those who had always been close to Barron's family. Their motives were clear. The movement wasn't a force for good. It was a tool, one that could be used to manipulate entire societies and push an agenda of power and influence. Barron had no idea how far-reaching these plans went, or how deeply his family was involved, but the implications were terrifying. The mystery surrounding the movement deepened with every passing day, and Barron found himself tangled in a web of lies and half-truths. But just when he thought things couldn't get any more complicated, a tragedy struck. One of the key leaders in the kindness movement was assassinated under mysterious circumstances. The death was violent and swift, with no clear explanation. The media pounced on the story, offering speculation but no answers. The authorities were stumped. There were rumors of foul play, of hidden agendas, of enemies lying in wait. And then, just as the dust was beginning to settle, Barron's name surfaced. It was subtle at first, a whisper here, a mention there, but soon it became clear. Barron was being implicated in the assassination. How could this be? He had no idea what was happening, and yet the media was turning on him. News outlets from across the world painted him as a figure of suspicion, questioning his role in the murder. Was he involved? Had he somehow orchestrated the killing, or was he simply caught in the crossfire of a larger conspiracy? The mystery grew deeper with every passing moment. Was the assassination a calculated move by those who wanted to seize control of the kindness movement? Who stood to gain from the leader's death? Was Barron's association with the movement enough to paint him as a villain, even though he had never known the true intentions behind it. As Barron grappled with the unfolding chaos, he realized that his life had become a puzzle he couldn't solve. The walls were closing in, and the lines between friend and foe were becoming dangerously blurred. Who could he trust in a world where everyone had their own agenda? And more importantly, who had the power to silence the movement? And him, once and for all. The truth was slipping further out of reach, and Barron found himself at the center of a storm that was no longer about kindness. It was about power, control, and the dangerous forces that lurked just beneath the surface. As Barron watched the chaos unfold around him, a chilling realization began to take shape in his mind. The kindness movement, which he had once believed was his to guide, was not what it seemed. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, each one revealing a deeper, more sinister truth. It wasn't just a social phenomenon. It was a carefully orchestrated scheme. The movement had been engineered from the shadows, crafted by powerful forces within the government and business world. And Barron, unknowingly, had been their puppet. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything had been set in motion long before he had performed that first simple act of kindness. To understand what was really happening, Barron began to investigate the mysterious woman he had helped, the one who had appeared in the viral video. She had seemed so genuine, so vulnerable at the time, but Barron soon discovered that she wasn't just a random stranger. She had been a key player in the creation of the movement, a part of a secret faction that had been quietly pulling the strings. The woman had been hand-picked, used as bait to draw Barron into something much bigger than he ever could have imagined. The deeper Barron dug, the more he uncovered. The kindness acts that had swept the world weren't about healing the broken or inspiring a better future. No, they were a covert operation designed to manipulate public sentiment. The entire movement was a tool, a weapon to make people more malleable, more willing to accept influence from unseen forces. The public was being led to believe that kindness was the answer to all of the world's problems, but in reality, it was a psychological ploy to soften the masses and prepare them for the next phase of control. Acts of kindness were no longer about goodwill. They were about power. And then, as the layers peeled away, Barron made a chilling discovery. The mysterious group that had been following him was not just a bunch of idealists who had gotten swept up in the movement. They had a purpose. They weren't interested in kindness for its own sake. They were using Barron's image, his newfound popularity, to orchestrate a global shift in power. The world had been divided, and they saw an opportunity to unite it. Not through peace or harmony, but through control. With Barron at the helm, they could steer the world's actions, bending societies to their will. Everything Barron had been a part of, every moment of inspiration, every gesture of goodwill, was part of a grand plan, one he had never consented to. He wasn't a hero. He was a pawn. Caught in a game played by people who were far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. Desperate to understand how deep the conspiracy ran, Barron decided to confront the group behind the movement. He arranged a secret meeting, hoping to find some answers, to force them to reveal their true intentions. But what he discovered there would change everything. As he sat in the dimly lit room, surrounded by the faces of those who had manipulated him from the beginning, Barron felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The truth hit him like a sledgehammer. The person who had been orchestrating the entire plan, the one who had been feeding him information, guiding his every move, was someone he trusted, someone close to him. It wasn't just the shadowy group that had been pulling the strings. Barron's own family, his closest confidants, had been using him to carry out their dangerous plan all along. The betrayal was unfathomable. He had been set up. His every step, every action had been carefully calculated to lead him here, to this moment, where he would unknowingly become the centerpiece of a global power grab. The people who he thought had his best interests at heart had been playing him, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Barron was no longer just a part of a movement. He was a key player in a game of political and economic dominance. As the realization sank in, Barron knew he couldn't trust anyone anymore. Every relationship, every alliance, was now tainted by the dark forces that had manipulated him from the start. The kindness movement was a lie. The world had been deceived, and Barron had been its unwilling messenger. Now he had to decide. Would he continue to play their game, or would he fight back and try to unravel the conspiracy before it was too late? The clock was ticking, and Barron had no idea just how far the deception had spread. Barron stood on the precipice of a decision that would change everything. His mind raced as the weight of the evidence he had gathered pressed down on him. The conspiracy was far more intricate and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The faces of those who had manipulated him flashed through his mind, each one a reminder of how deep the betrayal ran. He had uncovered their secrets, pieced together their plans, and now it was time to expose the truth. But in the stillness of the night, doubt gnawed at him. Was he really ready to bring down the very forces that had been controlling his every move? As Barron prepared to release the information to the public, an unexpected twist shook him to his core. The people behind the movement, the ones who had orchestrated everything, had vanished. It was as if they had never existed. Their names were wiped from the records, their traces erased from every corner of his investigation. No one knew where they had gone, and the unsettling truth was that they might still be watching, waiting in the shadows for their next move. Barron had thought he was about to bring the curtain down on their plan, but now he wasn't sure if anyone would even believe the truth, or if it even mattered anymore. The conspiracy was a ghost, lingering just out of reach, its origins hidden in the darkness. Barron had exposed the layers, but the true architects of the movement were nowhere to be found. They had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions in their wake. Were they still pulling the strings, silently manipulating the world from afar? Or had they moved on to something far more dangerous, something even bigger than Barron could comprehend? In the end, Barron made his choice. He would take a stand and reveal everything. The world had to know the truth. He couldn't live with the knowledge that people were still being misled, that the kindness movement, once a symbol of hope and unity, had been used as a tool for control. With a heavy heart, he released all the evidence, making the public aware of the conspiracy that had turned his life upside down. But as the world reacted, Barron realized that the fallout was just beginning. People were shaken, confused, and divided. Some couldn't believe that something so pure, so positive, could have been twisted into something so dark. Others felt betrayed, their faith in the movement shattered. The kindness that had once united people now seemed like a hollow lie, a mere facade for a much deeper agenda. Barron had pulled back the curtain, but the truth had only created more questions. Barron, forever changed by what he had uncovered, made a decision to step away from the spotlight. His role in the movement was over. He had exposed the truth, but the cost was steep. His family, his life, and his sense of trust had all been fractured beyond repair. He knew that he could never go back to the person he had been before. Too much had been revealed, and the world had shifted in ways he could not have anticipated. Yet, as Barron retreated from the public eye, the story wasn't finished. The questions remained. Who had really started the kindness movement? What were their true motives? Had Barron's actions been the final piece in a larger puzzle, or had he only scratched the surface of a much darker truth? And more ominously, what would happen next? The world would never be the same, and the forces that had controlled Barron were still out there, lurking, waiting for their next opportunity. The reader, left with these unanswered questions, is left wondering, will the kindness movement ever truly end? Or was it just the beginning of something much more insidious?